Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about.
Hi, how's everybody doing? My name is Mike Monteiro, and I'm a designer. And I want to talk about some of the stuff that we've been designing. On April 8th, 2018, BuzzFeed reported that popular gay dating site Grindr, with over 3 million daily active users, was sharing their users' HIV status with 2 other companies. Their status was included in a larger data dump simply because no one thought not to include it. It was designed that way. In 2014, Facebook ran an experiment on 650,000 human beings using their service. Facebook filled those people's news feeds with overwhelmingly negative news to see if it had an effect on their mental health. They ran a human mental health experiment on their own users without their consent. Now, obviously, anyone with mental health issues had no opportunity to opt out. Neither did anyone else. It was designed that way. By the way, it's estimated that 15% of the population suffers from depression. 15% of 650,000 is 97,500. 97,500 people with depression were put at risk so Facebook could learn how to target ads better. Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook's chief operating officer, offered this apology. It was poorly communicated, and for that communication, we apologize. We never meant to upset you. That was the whole point of the fucking study, Sheryl. And by the way, that's a non-apology, and that's designed that way too. In 2015, an African-American software engineer tweeted out that Google Photos was categorizing photos of him and his friends, who were also African-American, as gorillas. By the way, do you know how they solved this? They removed gorillas as a designation. Not only was it designed this way, but the problem was so deep down in the foundation that it couldn't be fixed without a teardown, which they weren't willing to do. Who here has an Apple Watch? Some of you may remember that when the Apple Watch came out, the heart rate monitor couldn't read people with tattoos Apple sold you on. And y'all bought it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, only if that too happened to be a solid color, a dark color, and people bought this explanation. I guess Apple didn't have any people with tattoos working on the Apple Watch. Come to think of it, I think I've ever seen anybody with tattoos presenting at an Apple event. It was designed this way, but this was a long time ago, right? I'm sure they've gotten better at that. No, we have not gotten better at this at all. We're still designing it this way. On February 22nd of 2019, we discovered that period tracking app Flow was telling Facebook when women were having their periods. as well as when they had stated an intent to get pregnant or not, and by when. The funny thing about this one is that Flow says they didn't know they were doing it, and Facebook says they didn't know that they were getting the data. And you know what? I actually believe both of them. Because this shit was built with React. Anybody here build shit with React? React is built by Facebook. A scorpion is going to do what a scorpion knows how to do. It's going to send data to the mothership. Flow was using Facebook developer software, which is designed to gather data by design. So it did what it was designed to do. This wasn't a bug. It was designed to work this way. In 2014, ICE awarded Palantir a $41 million contract to build a database for keeping track of immigrants. ICE considers this database absolutely essential in discovering what they call targets. And among those listed in that now operational database are over 2,000 infants forcibly separated from their parents and put in cages as they applied for refugee status in the United States. This database was built by designers who knew why and for whom they were designing it, and they designed it to work exactly as it's working. On March 4th of 2019, we discovered that Facebook was publishing the phone number that you gave them to enable two-factor authentication and making it searchable, and you couldn't do shit to stop them from doing it. On April 18th, 2019, Facebook, Jesus, their name is coming up a lot, isn't it? Facebook announces that there were millions of Instagram accounts hanging with their passwords out in the wind. Now, what's really shady about this one is they announced it about an hour after the redacted Mueller report was released, hoping that nobody would notice. So there's the crime, and then there's the cover-up. And by releasing it while everybody's focused somewhere else, they get to keep claiming that they're transparent about this shit. And you better believe that that was designed to work that way. In April of this year, ProPublica, the best investigative journalism team in this country, who you should all be supporting, by the way, ran a report on how TurboTax is using dark patterns, the shitty designer's best friend, to trick people into paying to file their taxes. Now, for those of you who don't know, if you make less than $66,000 a year, you get to file for free. And Intuit has been lobbying Congress to keep the IRS from offering a free service of their own, promising that they'll take care of it, and then using dark patterns to obfuscate that option. It is very much designed to work this way. And they're also lobbying very hard to get that law changed, because they've decided that if they can add a few dollars to their annual earnings by squeezing money out of the people who can least afford it, they're going to do it. Just last week, Facebook, who is now sadly the world's #1 news provider, decided they would not take down a video of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi altered to make her look drunk and slurring her words. They decided to willingly distribute misinformation. This is by design. And for the record, the GOP annually spends about $20 million on Facebook ads. So keep that in mind. Ugh. On November 6, 2016, Donald Trump received 2.9 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton. And the Electoral College, originally designed by good white men to entice agrarian slave-owning states to join the Union, handed the election to the candidate with fewer votes, who also happened to be a white supremacist. It was very much designed to work this way. And on April 23rd, as I'm writing this talk, we find out that Twitter CEO and human intelligence vacuum, Jack Dorsey, had a closed-door meeting with Donald Trump about the health of public conversation, which is like your oncologist checking in with your tumor about your treatment plan. And this was right around the time that Donald Trump was tweeting out thinly veiled threats to U.S. Congressperson Ilhan Omar, a Muslim woman, as well as an elected official. Jack Dorsey did not meet with her. He met with her harasser. After meeting with Trump, he calls Ilhan Omar to tell her he's cool with Trump tweeting death threats at her on his platform. The harassment is by design. But the real truth that I came to talk to you about today is this. The Jack Dorseys of the world will never change. The Mark Zuckerbergs of the world will never change. The Keith Rabois of the world will never change. The world was designed for people like this to succeed. And they're succeeding, even as they're destroying the world to do it. In the words of the great late Ann Richards, these fools were born on third base and think they hit a triple. And it's easy to blame these idiots for all this crap. It's also fair. But it's also self-serving, and it omits a big part of the problem. We can accuse these assholes of self-serving inaction, and that's fair. But what's not fair is to call them self-serving assholes while cashing their checks. What's not fair is to rail against the horrors of Silicon Valley while implementing these horrors. What's not fair is to believe that we're innocent bystanders to the damage that our work has done. Now, this thing's been going on for what, 4 days? And there's been a lot of good speakers, and they've all made you feel really good. I'm not going to do that. Because this is a story that we need to hear. This is a story of where we put our labor. And where we put our labor is a choice that we should be willing and able to make with our eyes wide open, fully aware of its repercussions. Who we work for and how we do that work are the only things that matter right now. Your labor and my labor, our labor, renders their ideas real. Our labor gives their rancid dreams form. Our labor harvests the fruit of their wickedness. We designed the shitty interfaces that don't protect people's private information. We designed social networks that have no way of dealing with abuse and harassment. We designed a financial incentive system that would lead Mark Zuckerberg to assert that what's good for the world isn't necessarily good for Facebook, which is an actual quote. And lead Jack Dorsey to believe that engagement was a more important metric than safety. Either by action or inaction, through fault or ignorance, we have designed the world to behave exactly as it's behaving right now. These are our chickens coming home to roost. The world is on its way to ruin, and it is happening by design. The world ain't broken. It's working exactly as we designed it to work. And we're the ones who designed it. which means we fucked up. Now, there are two words that every designer needs to feel comfortable saying: no and why. These words are the foundation of what we do. They're the foundation of an ethical framework. If we cannot ask why, we lose the ability to judge whether the work we're doing is ethical. If we cannot say no, we lose the ability to stand and fight. We lose the ability to help shape the things that we're responsible for shaping. Every single one of those examples I pointed out could have been stopped by enough people asking why, saying no, or a combination of both. We are gatekeepers, and nothing should be making it through that gate without both our labor and our counsel. We are responsible for the effects our work have on the world. And what passes through the gate carries our name. It carries our seal of approval. We are the defense against monsters. And the worst of what we do will outlive all of us. If it exists, a designer worked on it. If it exists, a designer was okay making it. If it exists, a designer had an opportunity and a responsibility to keep it from existing. How many people here are familiar with Victor Papanek? Victor Papanek, who offered us a path towards developing spines and design for the real world, which I encourage you all to read, referred to us as gatekeepers. He reminded us of the power that we have, the agency that we have, and the responsibility that we have. He reminded us that labor without counsel is not design. We have a skill set that people need in order to get things made. And that skill set includes both an inquiring mind and a strong spine. We need to be more than a pair of hands, and we certainly cannot become the hands of unethical men. As Victor said, the only important thing about design is how it relates to people. Not how much it scales, not how much data we're collecting, not how much profit it's generating, but how it relates to people. Unfortunately, there's no longer room in Silicon Valley to ask why. Companies task designers with moving fast and breaking things. How has become more important than why. How fast can we make this? How can we grab the most market share? How can we beat all our competitors to market? How can we grab that sweet, sweet, juicy data that we have no idea what to fucking do with? And the current generation of designers have spent their entire careers learning how to work faster and faster and faster. And excessive speed gets products through the gate before anybody notices what they are and how foul they smell. When we move fast, we break things. Now, it's one thing to break a database, but when that database holds the keys to intimate relationships and the names of 2,000 caged babies, the database isn't the only thing that breaks. And along with speed, we've had to deal with the amphetamine of scale. Everything needs to be bigger and faster. It's no longer good enough to be the best in your category. You've got to destroy all your competition. You have to burn the sky. You have to view your competitor as an enemy. And God damn, if you can destroy democracy on your way to doing it, take a swipe at that too. Obviously, this woman's a joke because there's no way, this image is a joke because there's no way a woman could get that close to power in Silicon Valley. He butchered the joke and he got the laugh anyway. When we move fast and break things, and those things get bigger and bigger, the rubble falls everywhere, and it destroys communities, and the rising dust blots out the sun. We need to measure more than profit. We need to slow down, and we need to measure what our work is doing out there in the world. We need to measure the impact that our work has on people's lives. Then we need to start designing things that improve the lives of people. Not just the people who make them, but the people who use them. Design things that have a positive impact on society at large. If your product can't make a profit without making poor people poorer, your product should not exist. Fuck your product. Twitter saved itself from bankruptcy by allowing fascists, and I don't use that word lightly, to run free, and by allowing a 72-year-old racist xenophobe to break every single one of its rules because it was bringing them engagement. Now, in 2018, it paid off financially. Twitter had its first profitable quarter. Now, Jack Dorsey, who's technically an invertebrate, was vindicated. His strategy of turning a blind eye to harassment and abuse while building a giant bullhorn for outrage and white supremacy paid off. Wall Street was happy. Shareholders were happy. Investors were happy. By the standards of capitalism, this was a success. But children were in cages. Immigrants were terrified. Synagogues and mosques and churches were being shot up. And decent people like Heather Heyer were being murdered by the goons Donald Trump was dog whistling to from that very platform. Is this the system that you want to contribute to? Twitter's profitable quarter came at the expense of democracy, decency, and the safety of the world. Now, sadly, Jack didn't use his newfound profits to buy himself a spine, but rather a shovel to dig himself down even deeper. Shortly after being rewarded for designing this garbage fire, he was once again talking about how this time, no, seriously, for real, this time, guys, we're going to do something about that abuse. People don't see the things they're rewarded for as problems to fix. And as much as I'd like to put that entire disgrace at Jack Dorsey's feet, and heaven knows he deserves it, he simply couldn't have executed that plan without the help of every single person working for him. Every single employee working at Twitter knew exactly where it was headed. And if they didn't, it's because they weren't looking. And while I don't doubt that there are a few people trying to right the ship from the inside, you simply cannot correct a problem that management doesn't see as a problem. As Upton Sinclair so eloquently put it, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. Twitter never wanted to understand the problem. Their salaries depended on them not understanding it. If Twitter believed it had any kind of problem, they believed they had a PR problem. But Twitter employees bore a responsibility to ask why and to say no. When they agreed to work at the company, their job wasn't just to build a tool for the company, but also to understand how the company worked and to make sure that it wasn't working in a way that was detrimental to society. This is a burden that all of us share, no matter where we choose to work. It's part of the job. It's not an add-on. It is core. It is the very foundation of what we do. The real question isn't how you're going to pay your rent or mortgage while working ethically. The real question is why the hell you'd be willing to work unethically in the first place. You wouldn't tolerate unethical behavior from any profession that you interact with. You'd be livid. I have seen those airline tweets. Yet you want to reserve the right to do it to others? As designers, we have an ethical responsibility to the entire ecosystem that we design with this. Our job isn't just to make money for ourselves, although we can't ignore that. Our job isn't just to make money for the people who hire us, although we can't ignore that. Our job isn't just to do work that delights the people who use it, although we can't ignore that either. Ultimately, our job is to do all of those things in equal measure, and most importantly, in a way that benefits the society that supports us all. When we find ourselves working in a system that favors one side of that equation over others, our job is to correct the system. You want a design problem? There it is. The biggest design problem of our time. How do we work in Silicon Valley and places like Silicon Valley within a system that favors profit for one side of the equation over the livelihood of all the other ones? How do we work within a system run by people who believe getting theirs justifies every decision they make? And look, it's really easy to tell you not to work at organizations that do unethical shit, like weapons manufacturing, the private prison industry, Catholic Church. That stuff's easy to avoid, and it's fairly self-selecting. Asking ourselves whether something is ethical isn't just a thing that we need to do when deciding to take a job. It's a thing that we have to ask ourselves every day that we're on the job. The biggest problem is people with good intentions. Because when I look out over the landscape of the companies that destroyed democracy and increase income disparity, I see social networks, I see open source blogging tools, I see the sharing economy, I see services that very well might have passed that first ethical test. I see companies that for the most part were created with the best of intentions falling into a system that rewards growth regardless of how it comes. In fact, Silicon Valley champions the idea of disruptive growth, and in their Randian-fueled haze of dime store objectivism, they see anyone trampled by that growth as not being fit enough to survive. What we need to worry about isn't unethical industries, it's unethical decisions made over time because of ill-conceived motivations. We built the networks that brought this world to ruin. We built the digital megaphones that brought the alt-right to power. And when we realized what was happening, we refused to do anything because of the money it was bringing in. And while the decisions on what course to take is made at the top of these organizations, like Jack Dorsey refusing to budge an inch on abuse and harassment, ultimately, those decisions cannot be implemented without our labor. And there, right there, that's our power. Labor. Working the right way requires constant vigilance. It's why we've learned to ask why, and it's why we need to say no. That vigilance is required of everyone you work with. But you also can't expect that somebody else is taking care of it. And working at a place that's not making good ethical choices doesn't absolve you from having to make them yourself. Yeah, I've traveled around the world talking about this shit, talking to designers about ethics, and one of the lines that I hear repeated over and over and over from designers trying to get absolution from working ethically is, well, if I don't do it, somebody else will. That's lazy logic, and you're smarter than that. Just because somebody else is willing to be a dick isn't enough of an excuse for you to be a dick. Just because your boss asks you to implement something fraudulent isn't enough of an excuse for you to do it. When no one else around you is asking the hard questions, when no one else around you is standing up for the people who entrust their personal information and their relationship statuses and other things to your services, that is when we need you the most. So rather than deciding the fight is over before it's even started, consider that standing up for the right thing might just be the spark that ignites others. I honestly believe that there are more people out there who want to do the right thing than people who want to do the wrong thing. Be the one who motivates the ones around you to behave their best. And if the person next to you should be the one who says, this doesn't seem quite right, be the one who backs them up. You are not alone. Now, in July of 2018, after ICE started separating refugee families at the U.S.-Mexican border and putting their children in cages, it came to light that Microsoft had subcontracted with ICE on face recognition software that they were using to identify undocumented Americans. And while it's true that Microsoft employees built that software in the first place, when they found out who was using it and why, well, that was their line in the sand. They got together and they demanded that leadership cancel that contract. And you know what? It worked. They were successful. That contract got terminated. The people doing the work have a tremendous amount of power in these situations. That's you. Are there repercussions? Hell yeah, there are. You might lose your job. And in America, that's likely to mean your health insurance as well, which is also by design. We'll get to that in a second. What you need to understand is that there are repercussions either way. When the work we do can be used to put children in cages, we have to ask ourselves whether the repercussions we might face are more or less terrible than the repercussions those children are facing. And as the employees of Microsoft found out, you can fight and you can win. On November 1st, 2018, 22,000 Google employees walked out in solidarity to protest the company's handling of sexual harassment cases, plural. This was a coordinated effort involving multiple offices in multiple cities, multiple continents. It took time, it took effort, and it took some courage. The world noticed, though, and Google management had their feet held to the fire. Now, sadly, a few months after the walkout, the New York Times reported that the women who'd organized the walkout were being retaliated against. So you know what? They did it again. They did it again. They walked out again. Once you wake up a labor force, it is hard to put it down. Once people feel the collective strength that we draw from each other, once you wake up a lioness, you are fucked. If only the employees at Twitter had the same courage, we could have avoided a lot of this mess. And I can draw you a very short, very straight line from Donald Trump not being kicked off of Twitter to the concentration camps on our southern border right now. And that's not an exaggeration. And I have no doubt that employees at Twitter are frustrated about how their company is being run. And the same goes for employees at Facebook, Google, even Uber. And to think there aren't at least some people in those places trying to do the right thing is naive. The question isn't whether they're there, it's why they stay. Why don't Twitter employees quit? Why don't Facebook employees strike? Why didn't Uber employees run Travis Kalanick out of town on a rail sooner? When you work at places like this, you need to know that there is a line that you will not cross. Now, we found out what those Microsoft workers' line was. They weren't willing to have their labor used to put children in cages, so they walked. I have to assume that Twitter's employees are okay with everything Twitter has done up till now. I have to assume that Twitter hasn't crossed a line for them yet. I have to assume that because they're still there. There are things worth quitting for. There are things worth getting in trouble for. This is the time for good trouble. Oh, but wait a second. We got to slow our roll just a little bit. We got to address some real concerns, right? Because sometimes the reasons that people can't walk away are a little bit more complicated. And those reasons are by design as well. Let me walk you through a few of them. To live and work in the United States is to live and work in the last rich nation that doesn't provide its citizens access to health care. In the United States, health insurance is tied to your employer. And although more and more employers are trying to bamboozle you out by calling their workers contractors, that's a thing too. But let's say that I work on the Twitter trust and safety team, and let's say that I want to ban a user who has a history of racist remarks, but my CEO says no, because he's a dick. I want to do the right thing, and I want to press the issue, except, God damn it, I have a small child with a health problem, and she's on my insurance, which my employer provides. So I do what my boss wants, even though I know it's wrong. I can't fault someone for choosing their kid's health in that situation. The problem here isn't somebody making an unethical decision, although they are. The problem is the system that puts a worker in that position. We must be free to do our jobs and to do them as they need to be done without our family's health care hanging over our heads. To understand the reason why people who might want to do the right thing don't always choose to do it, we need to understand the entire system in which they work. And health care is a huge part of it. Education is another. In the United States, the average cost of tuition and fees for a private college is almost $40,000 a year. A public college will cost you about $10,000 a year if you already live in that state, and about $25,000 if you're out of state. Multiply that by 4 years, and you got a ton of people in their early 20s entering the workforce saddled with $60,000 to $160,000 in debt. Those numbers aren't just high, they're a form of violence on young people. America punishes young people for wanting to learn. That needs to change. Now, this sets up scenarios where people entering the workforce need to find jobs that pay them well, and once they found that job, they need to hold on to it. So we've got kids with very little job experience working at these massive companies that pay them enough to pay down that student debt and are supplying their health insurance as well. This isn't a recipe for ethical revolution. This is a recipe for how to build a workforce that's beholden to you. Because let's also remember that most of the states in America practice at-will employment, which means your boss can fire you at any time for any reason. Now, some professions have unions and professional organizations to help mitigate this and bargain collectively. We need the same. It's time. And this problem is only worse for international workers here on work visas. This is my friend Angela. She works at a tech company in San Francisco. She was born in the Philippines. She originally came to the US as a student, then found a job. And like many tech workers who are here on H-1B visas, her ability to stay in the country she now considers home is tied to her employer sponsoring that visa. And anytime she encounters an ethical dilemma at work, she needs to ask herself whether fighting for that ethical dilemma is worth getting kicked out of the country for and getting sent back to the Philippines. That is heartbreaking as shit. Just so we're clear, neither our horrific healthcare system, nor educational debt, nor immigration status absolve you from doing your job ethically, nor do they make it okay to work unethically. But holy shit, can we please make it easier for these people? Can we please make this more manageable? Because the really unethical thing is to not provide everyone with care, education, and safe haven. So before you go complaining to the conference organizer that you didn't come to a design conference to hear a political talk, realize that there is absolutely no way to talk about design ethics without getting political, because this shit that I just talked about gets resolved at the polls. Looking out for you. On December 2nd, 1964, at the height of the civil rights struggle, Mario Savio climbed the steps of Sproul Hall at UC Berkeley, which had just banned all political activity and fundraising on campus. This is the famous last paragraph of the speech he gave that day. There is a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you cannot take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all. There comes a time when, despite our best efforts, despite the persuasion, the fighting, and the best of all possible efforts of good people, things cannot be saved. The foundation is broken. Those in charge are rotten. The effort to fix it even if everybody could decide on how to fix it, wouldn't be worth the time and investment. Or worse, a product is so inherently broken, so evil, and run by unethical people that its very onerous existence only serves to further toxify society. Not everything can be fixed. There is a time to burn things down. The good news is, it's already on fire. The promise of the internet was that it was going to be a place that gave voice to the voiceless, visibility to the invisible, and power to the powerless. That's what originally excited me about it. That's what originally excited a lot of you about it, I'm assuming. It was supposed to be an engine of equality. Suddenly, everyone could tell their story. Suddenly, everyone could sing their song. Suddenly, that one weird kid in Helena, Montana, could find another weird kid just like him in Bakersfield, California, and they could talk and know that they weren't alone. Suddenly, we didn't need anybody's permission to publish. We put our stories and songs and messages and artwork where the world could find them. And for a while, it was beautiful, it was messy, it was punk as fuck. We all rolled up our sleeves and we helped to build that. And we were the ones who were supposed to guide it there and keep it there. We failed. We failed because we were naive enough to believe that everyone had the same goals that we did. We failed because we underestimated greed. We failed because we didn't pay attention to history. We failed because our definition of we wasn't big enough. We designed and built the platforms that undermine democracy across the world. We designed and built technology that's used to round up immigrants and refugees and put them in concentration camps. We designed and built the platforms that young, stupid, hateful men use to demean and shame women. We designed and built an entire industry that exploits the poor in order to make old, rich men even richer. Now, some of us pointed out that these things were odious, but we were told that we were making money, so shut the fuck up and chill out. And then we became sick at heart. The machine we've built is odious, and not only can we not participate in its operation, nor passively participate, it's on us to dismantle it. It was built on our watch, and it needs to burn on our watch. When a platform that we designed and built to connect people across the world is used to dox the parents of murdered children, and the people who run it refuse to do anything about it, when they refuse to fix it because they don't see it as a problem, when they attempt to justify the profits with which they're lining their pockets as values, we need to burn it to the ground. When the platform that we use to talk to family and old friends turns into a gun marketplace, and the people who run it refuse to fix it, we need to burn it to the ground. When that same network moves so fast that they break not just things, but tender things, fragile things, things with names, for the sake of those names, we need to burn it to the ground. When we refuse to let our own children use the fruits of our labor while still cashing the checks we're earning by addicting other people's children, we need to burn all that work down. Nothing is happening to the children. We are doing some sick, seriously bad shit to them. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine a world in which Facebook actually vetted the news that it was publishing before the 2016 election. Imagine a world in which Twitter didn't work overtime to normalize the alt-right to save its own bottom line. Imagine a world in which the service economy isn't widening the gap between the rich and the poor. In short, imagine a world in which we had done our jobs. Now is not the time for designers to get political. That was yesterday. Now's the time to wake up and fight. And by political, I'm talking about caring who our work is affecting. I'm talking about caring about who it's helping and who it's hurting. I'm talking about who's making decisions and who's being left out of them. I'm talking about increasing our definition of design beyond aesthetics and into ramifications. I'm talking about what we're willing to support and what we're willing to lay the tools down for. I'm talking about taking care of people. I don't give a good fuck whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, a Tory, a socialist, a liberal, a conservative, a Mason, Whig, or whether you take your orders directly from Lil Wayne albums played backwards. As long as you are a designer, you have a responsibility to make the world better for the rest of humanity. If you are a designer, you are a human being first, and it is your job to stop those that would denigrate humanity for their own selfish benefit. We have people counting on us to do better. This job isn't about helping Nike sell shoes. It's about making sure everyone has shoes. This job isn't about creating bullhorns for fascists. It's about making sure that those who are threatened by them have bigger bullhorns. This job isn't about building tools to hand our data to the corporations of Silicon Valley. It's about building tools to keep our data away from those fuckers. This job isn't about making rich white men richer at the expense of everyone else. It's about making sure that everyone earns an equal share for their labor. Oh, but Mike, how the hell are we going to pay our rent? You know, tech workers are some of the highest paid workers on the planet. You are not Jean Valjean. You are not one loaf of bread away from your family dying of hunger. Your argument is invalid. For too long, we have treated this job like we were servants. We did what we were told. We followed orders. We didn't ask questions. And we may have rolled our eyes every once in a while when something didn't seem right, but we did it anyway. We behaved as if we had no say and no agency in how this job was done. We lost control of our labor. We lost control of our hands. And finally, we lost our minds. Yes, design is political because design is labor, and your labor is political. Where you choose to expend that labor is a political act. Who you choose to expend it for is a political act. Who we omit from these solutions is a political act. And finally, how we choose to leverage our collective power is the biggest political act that we can make. If we choose to work collectively, we have a ton of power. If we continue to behave like servants, we're not just letting ourselves down, we're letting down everyone whose lives we swore to improve. We are late to the party. The world is working exactly as we designed it to work. And that's the problem. We're here because we've abdicated our responsibility as gatekeepers. We're here because we forgot how much strength we have. It's time to remember. Thank you. What's a book? Come on, come on. I got 3 more. You make $1 to their 70 cents.